And welcome to AdvancedEngineTech.com. My name is Wes Colby. I'd like to welcome you both to our website and to our video series. Today we're going to be going through a fuel tank step-by-step restoration process. We're going to go through, we're going to gently rinse it out, then we're going to add a rust converter, remove the rust, and then come back, rinse it out again, and then go through and add a tank sealer. This tank is in not too terrible of shape. We got it before there was any real deep pitted rust, so it makes the process a little bit easier. So let's get started. We just have it fastened down here in the back, so it's not going to move around or anything like that. We have a chemical resistant mat down on the top of our counter. I'm wearing nitrile gloves, chemical resistant lab coat, and safety glasses, all of which should be used at all times during this process because we are dealing with dangerous chemicals. So what we have in here is a little bit of acetone, and this is what we're going to use to rinse out our tank. What we want to do here is remove any grease, grime, or leftover fuel that might be in our tank still. And then we're just going to gently wash it around. So on the top of this tank we do have the fuel gauge removed, the fuel supply system removed. These are components we don't want to damage at all during this process. This tank doesn't have any baffle plates. Now, we chose this tank to do a video with because it's going to be real easy to drain out of the lid here. I want to get all the fluid out at once. In other tanks you might have to utilize a syringe or a small hand pump to remove some of the fluid from the tank. This is one of the most crucial steps in removing rust from your tank, because if there is any grease or grime or fuel residue in there, the rust converter is not going to work properly. So now normally what we would do to better wash out this tank is just seal off these holes here, put the cover back on so we could really shake it. But just to speed things up today, we have it all off so we can just continue on to the next step. We did do a pre-wash in this tank already. So we're just going to drain this out. You can see we got a good amount of grease and grime out of there, a little bit of rust color as well coming out of that tank. Now we're just going to refasten our tank down here so it can't get away on us. There we go, secured. Now what we have in this little tray here is just some basic pH material, so if we'd spill any of the acid in the rust converter, that it would neutralize right away. So now we'll go through and we'll add the rust converter. So you can utilize a standard polyfunnel. Now this is our rust converter. You can see it has a little bit of a green hue to it. This is because we just used this to do a different tank about 2 days ago for a customer. So you can reuse the rust converter. This is mixed about 5:1 with water. It should do a very nice job on the rust we have in this tank. Now we did pre-measure that out, so this tank is actually filled nearly right up to the top. And what we'll do in the next hour is we'll seal off these holes and we'll just flip it once or twice over the next 12 hours. And we'll come back and we'll remove the rust converter from it, take a look, and then go through, wash it again with acetone, and then move on to the tank sealing. So we'll get to that shortly. Our tank has been soaking now for about 12 hours. Now we're going to drain the rust converter out. This tank is going to drain pretty easily. If you have a tank that is going to drain more difficultly, I'd suggest removing the rust converter with a hand pump or a suction pump or something like that. So now what we're going to do is just add a little acetone in, wash it out again. We just want a nice clean finish in there for the tank sealer. And all you want to do during this is just kind of get every edge of it like we did in the beginning. Again, normally we just seal these off so that you can really rotate that tank around and get the top well. But just to keep the video moving along, what we're going to do is leave them open. Do is put this acetone back in this container, just because we didn't use this, so it's still usable for next time. And now we'll drain this acetone out of the tank. So why do we use acetone? One of the reasons is it's going to remove any residual grime or anything left in there. The second reason is it dries very fast, so it's a good cleaner and we don't have to worry about removing it, just leaving it out in the open like this. That acetone is going to evaporate out. So we just let this air dry for about 15 minutes. That acetone has evaporated out. Now we're going to go through and just add a high concentration of rust converter to give us a nice final phosphate layer on the inside of this tank. So now what we're going to do, because that only covers the bottom of the tank, we're just going to go and rotate this periodically over the next hour, and then we'll come back, remove that, wash it again, and then go through the tank sealing. So we've just removed the rust converter from this tank for the final phosphating layer. We washed it out with acetone again, and then we went through and we just installed some corks on the top where there was some holes, so we can now begin the tank sealing process. We have our WAGNER Tank Sealing Resin. Just going to put some in there using a funnel. I would recommend measuring out beforehand using water and just kind of going through with a test run and seeing how much liquid it's going to take to coat the internal surfaces. So you can do that with water, and then you can come back, wash it with acetone, and then begin the tank sealing process. So now we just have a little plastic piece of film here that we put underneath the cap to protect the cap and the vents in the cap, so we don't seal those shut. Now literally all we have to do is rotate our tank. And I would recommend starting with the hardest surfaces first and then working your way around. And you're just going to keep rotating it like this, real systematically, so you make sure that every surface is getting coated. What I like to do is I'll get it pulled up in one of the corners, and then I'll rotate it corner to corner, and then down to the next corner, and just make sure you get all those seams, because a lot of times that's where you're going to have small pinholes. Rotate it again to this corner. Now we'll go to the top. Like the hardest part in our tank right here is going to be this incline here. So there's a little bit of a beveling in the tank. We just want to rotate it back and forth, kind of a variety of angles to make sure we get that coated. Flip it around. Right now what I like to do is remove the cover, take a look inside, and make sure that it looks like we're getting a really good coating. And it looks really good in there. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to put our excess resin back into our container here, and we'll come back and use that for the second coat. Now this tank is real easy to drain out, but in some tanks you might have to use a syringe to suck out and remove excess resin. So now we'll put our little cover back on, and what I like to do is position the tank so that any excess tank sealing resin in the tank is going to be on a surface that we're not going to see. So I'll set it like that. And what happens, why we do this, is if there's a little bit extra resin in there, we want it in an area that we can't see, just because it's going to become a little bit thicker of a layer, and it might have a little creamier color to it. Whereas all the other surfaces are going to have a nice clear coat of tank sealer on them. So we'll leave the tank sit here like this. In about 6 to 24 hours, we're going to come back, add a second layer. We're just going to do the same process again. It's important to make sure you seal back up the tank sealer container, because that will begin to harden otherwise. So we'll be doing the second coat in a few hours. Okay, so it's been about 8 hours. The inside of the tank is no longer tacky to touch, so we know we can go ahead and apply our second coating. It's going to be the same process as the first time. We're just going to add in some tank sealer. Put our little plastic film back on top of the cover. Fasten it down. Then once again, we're just going to go through, start at one corner, go to the next corner, and just keep going around corner to corner. And then we'll work on one of the flat sides. Go back and forth a couple of times. to the top of the tank. Again, we're just going to work it back corner to corner. And on the top of the tank is where we have this little beveling here. So we're going to work it back and forth a couple extra times over that, just to make sure we get good coverage. You can try just a few different methods when you're going along doing this. Like the end goal is just mainly to get the best coverage you can, get complete coverage on the inside of that tank. Alright, then we go through once again, remove the excess resin. We're just putting it back in this container. We have some more tanks to do, but if this is something you're going to store, we'd recommend not mixing the used tank sealer with the original tank sealer. But in this case, it's fine. This tank sealer is going to get completely used up. And we'll just let this drain. Once again, what we're going to do is just put the cover on and then put it in a position where any excess resin is going to drain to a portion of the tank we can't see. So on this tank, we're just going to put it on the top like that. And we'll leave it sit there. We're going to leave it sit for 48 hours, come back and check it, and then we're going to leave it sit for an additional week, 7 to 8 days, to let it completely cure before we go and put fuel in this tank. Now, if the temperature is below 50 degrees, you're going to want to double that time. So you let it cure for 15 days or so before putting fuel into this tank that you just sealed. So that is the complete total process. When this is done curing, we'll have a brand new tank, rust-free, and like new.